Welcome back, guys. We are going to be reviewing chapter 3 today of 1984. I hope you guys are really getting into it and getting to sympathize more with Winston now that we're learning about things about his family. So let's go ahead and get started. We learn about Winston's dream about his family. Another thing we're going to talk about is the whole theme of memory that keeps coming back over and over and over again. This recurring idea of why don't I remember what happened before the party came into power? Why can't I remember where my family went? Remember that the party wants to control your thoughts. And if you have a past that's different from what the party wants you to know, then they are going to have to do something to your memory in order to make you think that all you know is the party. All you know is what they want you to believe. The last thing we're going to talk about is this strange war between these different countries that used to be, I guess, whole continents, and now they're countries. Oceania, which is where Winston lives, it used to be England. England now becomes something called Ingsoc, which is like the socialist version of England. Ingsoc, that's Oceania. Eurasia and East Asia. There's a war between these countries, but we don't know who's against each other, who's an enemy, who's a friend, who's a foe. We don't know because it always changes. And the party does a really good job of going back and erasing the memory of what we used to know about the war, who is on what side, and in order to make you think that they have always been friends with Eurasia, or they've always been friends with East Asia. No, we're not enemies. Or yes, we are enemies. But what they don't want you to do is to think that they are flip-flopping back and forth. And so they will always go back and change your memory. Maybe it's through the news. Remember, Winston's job is to go back through newspapers of the past to change them to reflect that the Ingsoc party, that's the main party of 1984 with Big Brother, that they've always been in a particular kind of political, powerful position. They don't want you to see that they've been defeated. They don't want you to see that they have weaknesses in battle. So they'll always be showing their victories, no matter what they have to do to spin the truth. But before we get deeper into these aspects of what's going on in the story, this chapter this week, I want to introduce you guys to a new literary element that I think is going to blow your mind, but also is just a something that adds so much depth to any story. Short story authors use it, novelists use it, artists of every kind, from painting to movies. A motif is an artistic element that adds so much complexity, depth, emotion to the story. And we're going to explore the literary element of motif as it is expressed in 1984. But first, we have to learn what a motif is. A motif is a literary technique that consists of a repeated element that has symbolic significance to a literary work. So it's something that gets repeated over and over and over and over again. There's many motifs in 1984. Sometimes a motif is a recurring image. Other times it's a repeated word, phrase, or topic. Sometimes it's an action or a situation that recurs over and over again, maybe in the beginning, the middle, and the end of the novel, different times. It can even be a sound. Perhaps there's a bell that keeps playing over and over again throughout the novel that signals something important. I know in 1984, you guys are going to start hearing a song that that reminds Winston of his childhood. And that song comes back not just in one chapter, but in multiple chapters. And since the theme of memory is so important, motif of memory is so important, this sound, this song becomes a larger repeated pattern that can add depth and meaning to the work because it tells us something about our fundamental nature and Winston's fundamental desire to know what happened when the party came into power. What did they do to everybody's minds? A motif can be a smell, a temperature, something that is triggered in one of the characters. Perhaps it's a color that has symbolic meaning. The key aspect is that a motif repeats. And through this repetition, it helps to illuminate the dominant major ideas, the central themes, and the deeper meaning of the story. Why do authors use motifs? Well, they can do it to create a mood, to evoke, to bring out a mood in us or in the text, to illuminate and shed light on main themes, to engage the audience more deeply. When you're repeating this image comes to you over and over again, you start to feel it on a deeper level. To create unique symbolic meanings through repetition, and to establish a pattern of ideas, because this is what really makes a work of art a work of art. And a genius work of art is when there's a pattern and a network of ideas all connected. Let's do an example. This is not actually from this book, but I really love this example because it helps to clearly show what a motif is. Let's say a story has this repeated element. It has images of hand washing, of mopping floors, and refreshing rain. You notice that all of these images have something in common. They all have to do with water. You're washing your hands so that you can clean your hands. You're mopping the floor so that you can clean the floor that's dirty. The rain is coming down and that's cleaning the earth. These images of cleansing water, if all of these are repeated in the story, the author didn't accidentally do it. It's all deliberate. It becomes a motif if you have the similar images of these different actions of water. So even though they are different actions, they all have that similar idea of they have to do with cleansing water. So perhaps a theme of this story might be the desire, the need to purify or cleanse yourself. And when I say cleanse thyself, I don't mean physically, but I mean spiritually. So let's say you committed a crime or you did something wrong and you feel guilty. You want to not feel guilty anymore. So you're cleaning your hands. Okay, but the cleaning the hands is just symbolic. Okay, you want to, like in Macbeth, one of the most famous Shakespeare plays, Macbeth murders the king so he can become king. And after he murders the king, he has blood on his hands and he tries to wash the blood away. And of course, the blood comes off his hands because that's what water does. But the blood doesn't come off of his soul. So he always has this idea that he's murdered someone. So he's repeatedly trying to wash his hands and he can't do it. He believes that the blood is still there, even though it's not. So the hand washing becomes symbolic. He tries over and over again to wash his hands to relieve himself from this guilt, but he can't do it. What about in 1984? Well, in 1984, a motif we are going to be exploring today is the motif of knowledge, the motif of memory. And more specifically, I mean the motif of not being able to know or remember something that happened to you, or only vaguely remembering something that happened to you. This is a motif that recurs over and over again. It's a kind of action. So Winston will be like, why don't I remember this one thing? And that happens over and over again throughout the story. And you're going to have an activity where you're going to be finding in chapter 3 examples of this motif. So let's go to week 21, 1984 activity, and let's discuss the directions. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be finding 3 quotes in chapter 3 that reflect the motif of memory or knowledge. And like I said, this is when Winston is not able to remember something. Something escapes his memory or knowledge. Or He thinks he remembers something, but he's not sure if it's correct. There's plenty in chapter three. That's what chapter three is all about. And this motif recurs over and over again throughout the story. But we're just looking in chapter three today. And for each quote, you're going to copy the quote here, the quote that shows this motif of memory, right? It's just a quote that either talks about memory or hints at the idea of memory. And for each quote, you're going to explain in the final column how it relates to the larger theme of the party's control over their thoughts and minds. And don't worry, Winston will show you that he finds some sort of relationship between the fact that he can't remember anything and the party's control and power over its people. So if you need a reminder of what a motif is, please read the description at the bottom of the page. I copied it down here for you, including that example of cleansing water. And whenever you're done, you're going to turn it in on the Google Classroom when you are finished. I'm going to give you 12 minutes for this activity. All right, since you have taken time to go and find these instances of memory, I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about my main takeaways for each of these themes. And I want to see if maybe you have chosen some of the quotes that I'm going to show you. Winston's dream. Let's go take a look. First, I want to point out why dreams are so important in literature or in movies. Dreams are very important because they represent what's going on in our unconscious or our subconscious. Our conscious state is when we're very aware and we know and we're thinking and we know that we're thinking. But our unconscious or subconscious state is the part of ourselves that is like our past experiences, our knowledge that we don't always, our memory that we don't always have access to. Those are all part of our subconscious. Also, parts of our subconscious are things we don't want to think about, things we try to repress and try to hide. And dreams, according to Sigmund Freud, who was a very famous psychoanalyst in the 20th century, he believed that dreams were a reflection of all the things that we don't remember, but that are still locked deep inside of us, or things that we try to hide and we don't want to recognize, but are still there. So the party is trying to repress and hide Winston's past, right? They don't want you to have a family. They don't want you to have friends. Remember, he says it's a very isolating place to live in this party, under this party's rule. Because if you do have friends, if you have family, then you're more likely to organize against Big Brother. So what do we want to know about his dream? Well, his mother, he thought have been 10 or 11 when his mother had disappeared. Remember what it means to be vaporized? Vaporized is something that happens to people in the party who do not believe what the party believes. The fact that his mother had disappeared potentially tells us that she did not believe in the things that the party wanted you to believe. And Winston was only 10 or 11 when she disappeared. Maybe this is when the party took over. What are the things that he remembers about her? Well, what he does think is that she was probably vaporized in the Great Purges. The purges are when someone in power gets rid of people that they don't want. It's a really sad dream, actually. They're at the bottom of a well, him and his sister. And his sister, he doesn't know where she went either. She also disappeared. They were in the saloon of a sinking ship, looking at him through the darkening water. Remember, this is a dream. This is not a memory. This is a dream he's having. He feels guilty somehow that he's alive and his family members are not alive anymore. He was out in the light, in the air, while they were being sucked down to death. And they were down there because he was up here. So you know what this kind of makes me feel like? Was Winston one of the spies of the Youth League? Did he tell on his parents and they were vaporized along with his little sister? And now he doesn't remember because the party doesn't want you to remember, but he has this dream because somewhere in his subconscious he knows that he was the one who was the reason that they were vaporized. Could this be the case? He doesn't say it, but the fact that in his dream he feels guilty that they are being drowned on this ship going down, right? It's all symbolic. It didn't really happen. It'll like this. This is an image of how he feels about his guilt. But remember, here's the motif coming in. He could not remember what had happened. But he knew in his dream that in some way the lives of his mother and sister had been sacrificed to his own. So did he give them up? We don't know. Maybe there was some other reason why they were vaporized, but we do know that he thinks it was something having to do with him. So this is the thing about Winston's family, is that he doesn't really quite know what happened to them. He doesn't really quite know why they're gone, but he feels this guilt in his subconscious and that memory That's what the party doesn't want you to have. But of course, Winston represents someone who is trying to hold on to memory. And so that's why he's got the diary, because now he can write his thoughts and he can start to track things. And maybe he can get at his memory. And maybe he can prove that there's something the party is doing with his memory. And maybe if he has this proof, he can take it to someone like O'Brien and they can do something to get the party out of power. So we've discussed memory a lot. You did your motif about memory. But what I want to end with today is this war between Oceania, Eastasia, and Eurasia, and just talk a little bit about what's going on. Why is the party always flip-flopping between who they're at war with? And how does this reflect the party's agenda and what they want you to think about their victories? What's interesting is if you want to know something about the war, you actually have to think a little bit about the motif of memory. He's confused about the war. For several months during his childhood, there had been confused street fighting in London itself, some of which he remembered vividly. Right, so the war had come to London. The war, and when I say war, I mean, the party having a revolution and coming into power. That's how the party came into power. So he remembers that kind of fighting when it used to be called London, not Ingsoc and not Oceania. It used to be something else, of course. Of course, the party changed the name. Of course, you need to change the language so that everybody gets on board with your ideas. But to trace out the history of the whole period, to say who was fighting whom at any given moment, would have been utterly impossible, since no written record, no spoken word ever made any mention of what side anybody was on. Remember this theme of not being able to record memories. And they went and destroyed, that's what the Ministry of Truth does. They destroy written records in order to display a new kind of truth. They don't allow you to speak about it. And he says at this moment, for example, in 1984, if it was even 1984, wow, that's powerful. Who knows what year it is? Who knows what truth is? That's quite powerful, even if it's just very subtle in parentheses. Oceania apparently was at war with Eurasia, but in alliance with Eastasia. But in no public or private utterance was it ever admitted that the three powers had at any time been grouped along different lines. Actually, as Winston well knew, it was only 4 years since Oceania had been at war with Eastasia in alliance with Eurasia. So they had flip-flopped. Winston knew because he is the one who changes the truth in the Ministry of Truth. But officially, it never happened. Officially. That's not what they tell the people. The enemy of the moment always represented absolute evil. Okay, so it's not like Oceania would ever mistake who was the enemy and who, but really, Oceania is doing whatever it needs to do to get ahead. Maybe that means being in alliance with Eastasia now and then at war with Eurasia now, or maybe they need to flip-flop in order to, have their whatever happen. The main point of this whole war is that it's confusing. If you're confused, good, George Orwell is doing his job because he wants you to be just as confused as Winston is. That confusion is at the heart of this book. They do not want you to be logical. Your ignorance about the war, that is what they want. Remember, ignorance is strength. They want you to think that if you don't know anything, all the better for you. And so that's what I just want you to know is that they can make something that actually happened seem like it never happened. I love this beautiful question. He knew, Winston Smith, that Oceania had been in alliance with Eurasia just as short as 4 years ago. But where did that knowledge exist? If you say, hey, I know it's true, but in all the newspapers, all the records, all the history books, it's not there, then how do you know? The party makes you distrust your own knowledge. Only in his own consciousness. And in any case, remember, because of his diary, and because he knows the thought police are listening to him, or at least he thinks they are, his own consciousness, this beautiful place where all this knowledge lies, his memory of his family, it will soon be annihilated. He knows he's going to be vaporized. And if all others accepted the lie which the party imposed, if all records told the same tale, then the lie passed into history and became truth. Who controls the past? Ran the party slogan, controls the future. And who controls the present? Controls the past. Reality control, they call it. Okay, so there's so much about memory. I mean, he is not trying to be subtle about this. He's trying to be very clear that this theme is happening. And I want you to think about um, in what ways is history changed by the people in power? This is something that happens in every country. You're always going to present your own history as something victorious, and you guys were the good guys. But if you go to another country, they don't teach that version of history. So really, I want you to think about this is not just a book about only totalitarian regimes. It is a book about all types of power and how language, history, memory are some of the main tools of manipulation that people in power use in order to control and to get what they want. Great job today. Your homework is going to be to read chapter 4, and I'm going to have you complete week 21 homework. Let's go take a look at what you have to do. I'm excited to read more of your story. Obviously, you have to create it, but your literary element of the week that you're going to include in your story is going to be motif. Where we discussed motif today. You're going to add a motif to your dystopian novel. There's no limit to what a motif can be, so please be creative. Step 1, you're going to go to your previous assignment that you just did last week. You're going to copy and paste your whole story with the setting and characterization below. So everything you have for your story. And then you're going to write 2 to 4 more paragraphs of your story that introduces another scene with your main character. Of course, one that reflects your dystopian theme. We're going to call this rising action number 2. You're going to have rising action number 2. The previous week was rising action number 1. Next week will be rising action number 3 and 4. And then you're going to start getting to your climax. So you have 2 more scenes after this one before you get to the climax of your story. But here's the big thing. You're going to include a motif. And you're going to use this motif a few more times later in the story. And don't worry, I'll tell you when to use it. What are some things you can do for your motif? You can choose a color, you can choose an action, like, for example, Winston not remembering something. You can choose an idea, a word or a phrase, a thought. I wanted to add sound as well, a temperature, texture, anything that you want to add that will come back later in the story. And please just highlight your motif in yellow so I can take a look. Hand it in whenever you're finished, and I can't wait to read your stories. Thank you so much again for being on this journey with me and Winston, and we will see you next week.